Hi, I'm Phil Stevenson. I'm a member of the Oracle Database Appliance product management team. And welcome to the April installment of ODA on the Air. And I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Paul Sane. Paul, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Phil. Good to be
So
here.
we've got what I consider a pretty exciting topic. We're going to be discussing the 19.6 release features. And I think a lot of people have been anxiously awaiting 19.6, and so we have features that I think are very compelling that we'd like to bring to your attention. So Paul will present the first part of this, and then I'm going to talk about one of the features in particular, Standard Edition High Availability. Now, as usual, we have our mandatory safe harbor statement. Essentially, we're just saying that this is pretty much a general product discussion and information. It's not a commitment to deliver anything or a commitment to any kind of timeline or anything like that. So without further ado, Paul, tell us about 19.6.
Great, Phil. Okay, so as you said, the field's very interested in the ODA 19.6 release, and the reason being that it's going to be the first ODA 19c release that supports all the databases on all the ODA models, right? So that includes Oracle Database 19.6, 18c database, 12.2, 12.1, and 11.2 databases. And there are a couple points I want to make with the 19.6 release, is that the initial release will support both the fresh provisioning of 19.6 databases, as well as allow customers to upgrade from ODA 18a release on all the bare metal deployments. Now, there are some technical issues, so the OVM or the virtualized platform support will come a little later after the 19.6 release. So I want to make sure people realize that. And of course, with 19.6, we'll upgrade the grid infrastructure or GI to 19.6 as well. And finally, we have released the ODA 19.5 release with the support of the 19.5 database for a while now. And at the time, it was a point release for people that want to start testing 19c databases. But we have decided, because of customer demand, to be able to take them to our general ODA 19c release. But that will not happen on this 19.6 release. But they will be able to move from 19.5 to ODA 19.7 release. So most of our customers that are on 19.5 know about this already.
Yeah, Paul, so that was pretty much a parallel release to 19.6, right? And it was to help give customers a jump start on testing and kicking the tires on the 19c Oracle database, right?
That's right. That's right.
That required a re-image, and so we wanted to still give those guys a path to normal patching without another re-image. So they could be
exactly.
Right?
Yes. So, and we have a number of customers that are on 19.5, and they're looking forward to be able to patch to 19.7 later on. The second point I want to make with this release is that it's probably the biggest part of this release is that we are moving the underlying operating system from Oracle Linux 6 to Linux 7, and with the UEK5 Update 2 kernel. So that's a big change. Previously we have upgraded customers from Linux 5 to Linux 6, and that was very involved, right? You had to do pre-checks, you had to install custom RPMs and all that. So the customers will still have to do the same with this release. So I'll get into the detailed upgrade steps in a later slide. So obviously, from Red Hat's perspective, you're going from Red Hat 6 to Red Hat 7, they make you reimage your system. But we don't want to do that to our customers. So that's why we're making it so that customers can upgrade from the underlying Oracle Linux 6 to Linux 7. And that's part of our value add to minimize impact to our customers, especially if the databases are in production. So
that's a good point, Paul.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a bit of our developers' effort that goes into making that a seamless update and upgrade without doing a re-image.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Everybody's anxiously awaiting this release, but that makes things more complex. But in the end, it makes it a lot less disruptive.
Right. And many of our customers have gone through Linux 5 to Linux 6, And that was actually a very smooth upgrade for our customers because we paid a lot of attention on the upgrade process. And then the last part will be, talking about some of the 19.6 new features. And so we have a few. One is the integration with AuraCheck. So that's that we'll talk about a little bit later with the details, as well as network enhancements. And then, of course, the new standard edition high availability feature that you have a lot of slides to go over on that feature, right?
Great.
Okay. So so as I said earlier, that this is a upgrade of the operating system, underlying operating system from Linux 6 to Linux 7. So where are some recommendations for our customers? And now, as always, we always recommend our customers to review the release notes and known issues in our documentation. But for this upgrade, it's especially important because the fact that we're doing the OS upgrade underneath, right? And so these are the general guidelines, right? So the customers must run the pre-checks and AuraChecks before upgrading to 19.6. Now, we support pre-checks and AuraCheck for a couple releases now. Actually, AuraCheck for even longer time. And what happened is it will run through a bunch of checks to make sure your environments are ready for the upgrade, and identify any issues, and will generate a nice report, like HTML report that you can look at, and making sure that you can resolve those issues identified by pre-checks and AuraChecks before you do the upgrading. So this will avoid any issues or minimize any issues you will run into during the upgrade. Okay, and the second bullet, it's actually something new for this release. We released a what we call the ODA backup and recovery tool, or ODA BR tool, a couple releases ago. And previously, it was an option for customers to do that. But in this case, it's because we integrated AuraCheck with our pre-checks, we actually will also check that to make sure you have a backup of your system disk before you do the upgrade. This is primarily an insurance policy. We want you to do all the pre-checks, all the AuraChecks before you do the upgrade, and fix all the issues identified by those reports. But then even if you do run into issues after that, we want you to have the ability to quickly recover yourself to the pre-patch state with this ODA BR2. What the ODA BR2 does is it takes a snapshot of your local system disk and keep that copy on the system disk so that it could easily revert back to the pre-patch state. So we have a MOS note that describe all the details about the ODA BR2 and how to use it. And so definitely make sure that the customers review that notes and take the snapshot before they do the upgrade. So they have a sort of insurance policy to back up to kind of where they were before.
And Paul, I'd also like to point out, we've recently updated our blogs. Our listeners can visit blogs.oracle.com/ODA, and there's additional new information related to AHF and AuraCheck, as well as for restoring with the ODA VR tool. That's
yes. Yeah, so it's very nice. Previously, if something bad happened during the upgrade, the customer will have to call support, and then the support have to resolve the issue before the customer is back online. But with this, they can quickly, revert back to the pre-patch state and keep going, and then figure out what went wrong, afterwards, so that it doesn't block the system for the customers. Okay. So after you've done the AuraCheck pre-check, and then you back up your disk, then you do the upgrade process. Now, as before, we have another script that we ask the customers to download and run, is what we call the post checks. Because it is a system, the operating system upgrade, so we want to make sure after you do the upgrade, everything has completed successfully. So this is an additional step to, again, ensure the environments it's as robust as possible even after the upgrade. So we'll publish all these detailed steps in our documentation. So it's very, very important for customers to know to do all these steps to ensure that this upgrade is very smooth for our customers because especially because the underlying operating system changed.
Those are all good tips.
Yep. So here's just a quick ODA 19C release matrix. So our current release is ODA 18.8 that supports 18C database, 12.2, 12.1, and 11.2 databases. And with the 19.6 release, as I said earlier, it will be a bare metal support only, but we will support all the databases, right, including 19.6 databases. And as you can see on the parallel release of the 19.5, that was also bare metal only. And that required customers to re-image to get onto the 19.5. But as I stated earlier, we will allow customer on 19.5 to patch to 19.7, which will be our next release after 19.6. Okay.
And there again, that was an opportunity for customers to do some testing with 19C. It required a re-image, but to accommodate people and help them get into a regular maintenance and patching cadence, it's going to be an upgrade to 19.7. So that won't require another re-image, and that should be a good way to segue into a regular maintenance cadence.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's look at some of the 19.6 new features. Now, as I said earlier, AuraCheck's been around for a couple years now on the ODA, and we finally integrated the AuraCheck with our pre-checks. Now, AuraCheck has gone through a kind of brand change in the last few months. Now it's part of what we call the autonomous health framework. So if you go to download AuraCheck, you're going to see this thing called AHF, and but basically AuraCheck's part of that. And in the past, we say always download the latest version of AuraCheck, but now you basically have to download the latest version of AHF. So we also have a MOS note on that, so that again, make sure a customer download the latest version and then run the AuraCheck. Now, what's nice with 19.6 release is that once you're on 19.6, the AuraCheck is enabled by default. And so it will automatically run that as part of the pre-checks. And I just want to show you a couple of screenshots, as part of our browser user interface, or the GUI, and you can see, you can run the AHF report or the AuraCheck report, and then the output, and then it identifies all the issues that you need to address before you do the upgrade. So this, you can download the latest version and run it, and then after 19.6, it will be part of the pre-checks. The other enhancement we're doing with 19.6 is some network enhancements. So with 19.6, we're improving the quality of the service of our available networks by dedicating and isolating network resource to a specific database, so whether it's production, test, and backup. Now, below there's a screenshots of, you can see how on the first network, it's kind of the traditional simple network or basic network. But on the second part, where you can create a network that's sort of a rack database aware, it includes scan and VIP addresses, so that and then in the future we can do data guard aware type of network, right? But what's really nice is that with this we can associate a network to a specific database, and then therefore allow you to sort of isolate the workload for that particular database on different networks. And especially with our ODA XA, which we support many more physical networks, so this really plays nicely into that. So you can dedicate certain network to certain databases, and then provide better quality of servers by ensuring that all especially let's say your production database really need a lot of network traffic, and you can set it up so that you can dedicate that network to that particular production database.
Yeah, and I think, Paul, this will help customers meet service levels for production or set different service levels. It's just a much better way to manage the network bandwidth resource, and gives people a little more granularity in how they how they deal with network.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Now the next feature is what we call the standard edition high availability for ODA. So Phil, you've done a lot of research on this. Why don't you talk about sort of the background information on this feature?
Yeah, sure, Paul, absolutely. So standard edition high availability is available for ODA and non-ODA systems. And I'm going to be describing the implementation in ODA because, as ODA, as in with any other feature, we make that simpler for customers. We use, of course, the appliance manager and the browser user interface, the command line interface for ODA CLI commands. So we're using this same mechanism to provide high availability for a standard edition, except we've done a lot, our development team has done a lot to make it simpler for users to use, to convert legacy databases and that sort of thing. But essentially, this provides a cluster-based failover for Oracle Database 19c Standard Edition. In other words, I essentially could fail over from one node to the other. So actually, we tend to automate that, and I'll show you that in a little more detail as we come up. And so essentially with SCHA, when there's a node failure, the database will, if you configure it this way, and it will by default be configured this way, will automatically fail over to the surviving node. So in other words, if we use as a target node, node 0, if node 0 fails, we'll fail over to node 1. So that gives a measure of high availability. Now, this differs slightly in as much as that there is a brief blackout period during the instance relocation from node 0 to node 1, okay? But essentially, customers that used RAC with Standard Edition 2 and previous versions of Standard Edition, with this Oracle 19c version, will have to convert to Standard Edition high availability configurations. You have tooling to do that, to upgrade the Oracle Database 19c, to upgrade to Oracle Database 19c.
Yeah, so I think the key point here is that all the orchestration of this standard edition database failover is all sort of built in as part of our tooling, so the customer doesn't have to manually configure all these things, right?
That's absolutely the case. So if indeed it's the creation of a new 19c database, when users create that either at deployment time or with the browser user interface, we're going to put that into place. We'll put the high availability aspect into place. Now, optionally, customers can opt out of that if they have a reason to, but by default, we'll do that. And so there's a little more detail here, Paul, about the architecture for this tooling. And essentially, for the ODA implementation, I'm speaking specifically to ODA, we're talking about, we would run this on a bare metal ODA HA model, where we have the 2 server nodes, the shared storage, and server interconnects, okay? So single instance 19c databases, and the important emphasis here is on single instance, are automatically configured for failover at deployment time, and that means that the Oracle homes for the SC single instance database are maintained consistently from node to node, as well as scan and VIP addressing and that sort of thing, so that there's not a server endpoint that would change after a failover. And this doesn't require any kind of application changes or any kind of mid-tier reconfiguration to accommodate that failover. So the other aspect of this is we would support both planned and unplanned downtime, so that you could use this as a mechanism for rolling patching, for instance. So we could relocate a single instance database from one node to the other, just to accommodate some patching.
Yeah, this feature, I guess, when with the integrating within the ODA framework, I think it's very simple to do. So let's look at kind of how we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned the new single instance Oracle Database 19c standard edition databases are created using the ODA command line interface or the browser user interface, and they'll have this enabled, the high availability aspect of this enabled by default. And again, users can optionally disable it if they choose. But for legacy databases, in order to benefit from this particular functionality for the standard edition high availability, the existing RAC databases that come from SE2 and previous versions of SE with RAC have to be converted to single instance databases prior to upgrading to 19c. And once that they are single instance databases, those databases can be upgraded to single instance database 19C standard edition databases with this high availability functionality enabled. So this is a two-step process, but through and that uses ODA CLI commands, but the development team has made that extremely simple compared to what it might be on a non-ODA system. I don't have a direct comparison, but the point being is that they've tried to make this a lot simpler process.
Right.
Now, what users might see is if they have legacy databases, they won't be able to be started and mounted until they go through this process, because we only allow single instance on 19C database.
Yeah, so with the point here is that if you create a 19C, it's done automatically for you. But if you have 18C, 12C, SE databases, RAC databases, that needs to be converted first.
Yeah, and so there again in the ODA tradition, we're using these single command lines sort of functionality to accommodate that and make that fairly simple. Now, as I mentioned, we can create at deployment time or at any point in time new databases using the browser user interface. And this just gives you an example. So we have the option, and by default, we'll configure and enable high availability. But if that's something you don't want to do, you can just choose the no checkbox. And the target node, we make the distinction about target node. Target node is where the single instance database would run. By default, it'll run on node 0. And if node 0 fails, it will be relocated automatically to node 1 if it's configured for high availability. And it's interesting at this point, I just should bring up, is that forget about those concepts of active, passive. These are two independent servers. I think most of our ODA customers will configure one running production full-time and the other not. So they license a single standard edition license on 2 sockets and 16 threads, but they could indeed license standard edition on both nodes. And it's entirely, gives you a lot of flexibility for configuration. So we talked about provisioning. If we wanted to create a single instance database to 19C with standard edition high availability, we've got a new set of parameters for create database on the ODA CLI command. You see that -sh. You're going to get -sh by default, which simply says SE high availability. And you can specify a specific target node. And if you didn't specify that, again, it would default to node 0. So that would be the creation of a brand new SE high availability single instance database.
Right. So basically creating the new 19C standard edition database with high availability, you could do it in the GUI or you can use a command line, right? So you can
That's correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
And then we talked about the conversion process or the migration process for those existing legacy RAC databases that were standard edition. They'll have to be converted first to single instance databases. So there's a modify database command, and we've essentially created a new positional parameter to make it single instance. So once it's a single instance database, it could be mounted and would run as it would always run, except with no high availability. And if we want it to run with high availability, we can do an upgrade database, ODA CLI upgrade database, and make that be, provide the tooling to be high availability. So that would give you option to do with or without high availability. But all databases that run on 19C version of SE will have to be single instance.
Yeah. So this upgrade part has not been implemented in the browser user interface, but we will in the future release to also have a GUI version of this. But right now you have to run these two-step process.
Yeah, and like I said, this is not a heavy lift. These are simple commands, and shouldn't pose most of our experienced ODA users any issue at all. It's just new parameters.
Yeah. Let's see.
And as I mentioned, Paul, there's this aspect of a planned outage, maybe like a rolling patch or whatever. The modified database has also been modified so that we can specify a target node for a running database. So if I anticipate taking node 0 down, I first want to relocate my database to a new target node, node 1. And I'd use the modify database command like we see here, relocate that, and then I could do patching or whatever needed to be done on node 0, and then reverse that process with the same modify database command to bring it back and up on node 0. So this just gives you some flexibility for unplanned outages for relocation of the database.
Yeah, so yeah, it's very nice that for the standard edition databases that because we have the HA system, the infrastructure is there, and just with a simple command, you can just move that to the other node, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And so that, in essence, is what we see with standard edition high availability. It helps our standard editions continue to have a tradition of high availability. It's a little bit different implementation, but this is not a charge for feature on ODA. It's just part of ODA. And we've simplified it for users so that it's not complex. We've made it as automated as possible. And the developers did a really good job of making this in the ODA tradition simple and easy to use.
Yeah. That's a very important point. We keep adding these new features that makes customers' life a lot easier, without any additional cost to customers, right? All these new features that we talked about, Yeah, great.
Exactly.
Yeah, so at this point, I just want to remind people that we have a URL that link to all our past replays and presentations. And so at this point, I think we concluded our official presentation part, and we can, open up for Q&A. I noticed there were a number of chat questions, right? So Carlos, are you online?
Yes, I am. Yes, there were quite a few questions, and Kevin answered most of them already.
Okay.
And I just posted this to the chat, but you can answer it live. The standard edition high availability functionality, I think of it as like a weird mix of SE2 rack with rack 1 node kind of as an approach. I just want to make sure so that we're not misstating. Whenever we're licensing or recommending licensing to a customer for that, I assume you only license the active node, not the passive node, correct?
Well, we mentioned it. We really don't think in terms of a single instance database as active and passive. But to your point, there is indeed a production node and a node that's not running if you configure it that way.
Okay.
So if you configure 2 sockets on node 0 with 16 threads, that would be the license bogey, and it needs to fail over to node 0, it can, and the rules for the 10-day rule apply. So you don't have
so the 10-day rule does apply. Okay, that was going to be my next question. Yep. Okay, so if you're setting that up, and I just wanted to make this point to the sellers as as we're approaching this with customers. One more follow-on question: do you always have to license both sockets if you're bare metal?
Yeah, you would license essentially 4 cores, which would have 2 threads each on each socket.
Okay. And so just for everybody's information, you have to license 2 sockets minimum with standard edition if you're going to run HASE or SEHA, whatever we're calling it. And the 10-day rule does apply. So that even includes planned downtime, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So if you fail over to the second node for 1 minute in a day, 10 times in a year on separate days, then technically they're out of compliance and would have to license the other node. I just want to make sure we're clear with our customers when we're talking about that, so that we don't mislead them.
Yeah, Rowan, that's a good point. And so I wanted to make the point that both nodes could be active and you could still fail, okay, but you would pay for licenses on both nodes.
Exactly.
And if you wanted to fail in either direction, in other words, I could have a database running on node 1 and I could actually make it fail over to node 0 if they were both licensed, assuming that you had headroom in terms of resources, memory and storage and so on, and CPU to maintain your service levels. But that's still a possibility. Now, that would be a fuller utilization of the HA machine because we've already kind of limited to 4 cores across, or basically 8
Four
cores
sockets.
total on each node. So people might want to take advantage. Some people that maybe have, you know, a ULIF or all you can eat standard edition might want to take advantage of both nodes. That's a possibility is all I'm saying.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other voice questions? Just raise your
Yes,
hand.
Skip is.
I do have my hand up. Yeah.
Go ahead, Skip.
So on the SEHA, again, if that's what we're calling it, if it's SE2, there's a 2-socket limit in any environment, as I understand it. So how could we actually have?
Because this is 19C SE.
So it's no longer SE2. It's 19.
That's right.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's no longer SE2. I understand where you're going.
Okay. Good. That clears that up. Thanks.
And but there's a question from Phil. You talk about this 10-day, I guess, characteristic. But Trey Lower is asking if SEHA is very similar to Rack 1 node without the 10-day restriction.
You know, I don't want to draw a comparison with Rack 1 node in any sense because it's single instance databases. And I'll leave that to our Rack counterparts to make any comparison to Rack 1. I can understand why it begs a comparison, but you know, we don't, number one, we don't have that active passive consideration. And the 10-day rule just says that we'll give customers grace for 10 days in a calendar year for planned or unplanned outages without having to license both nodes.
And Garrett had a question saying most of the talk is for HA. What about the small and medium? And
well, yeah, that's a good question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. That's all. That's the question.
But yeah. For small and medium, this doesn't apply, okay? Because there's not a second node to fill over to. So that's just not a consideration for the S&M model.
Okay, and Trey, follow-up question, is asking, is there a licensing component to standard edition high availability, or is it included with a 19 CSC database or included with ODA?
It's included with ODA. And so it will be included as part of a grid infrastructure with the non-ODA systems, but it's not a charge for feature or anything like that. So that's the beauty of that. And so that's an accommodation to customers to make sure they enjoy some measure of high availability with standard edition 19C.
Yeah, I see Marcus raised his hand. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, Marcus, unmute. Go ahead, Marcus. Oh, now, Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is Marcus. I run product management for high availability, which includes Rack. So if you have a moment of time, and if you guys can hear me well, I could perhaps run quickly about over a comparison with Rack 1 node, and also clarify one or two of these licensing questions if you'd like. I don't know, is that of interest?
Sure.
Right. So
Sure,
for Rack 1 node, standard edition high availability is different from Rack 1 node, although I can see why you asked the question, because obviously Rack 1 node and standard edition high availability fail over a database from one node to another. That's, however, the only thing they have in common. Rack 1 node uses Rack code underneath the covers to establish this. Standard edition high availability doesn't. Standard edition high availability uses a single instance home, and the failover is managed and maintained by Oracle Grid Infrastructure underneath the covers. You could have done this manual with scripts, but this is really a fully integrated and fully supported solution, and particularly on ODA, you have seen the advantages that we provide, in addition to perhaps a generic case, which will come out later this year. So there is a significant difference between Rack 1 node and standard edition high availability. Another one would be Rack 1 node allows you to temporarily move an instance, meaning to say start another instance on the remote node to move an instance from one node to another. Standard edition high availability doesn't do that. It doesn't allow for that. And last but not least, standard edition high availability will not support rolling patching because of this previous feature not being available. So rolling patching will be related to an outage by support and licensing standards for standard edition high availability. So there is quite some differences between Rack 1 node and standard edition high availability. For the second part of the licensing question, standard edition 2 generally has a restriction of 2 sockets. But now that I explained how standard edition high availability is modeled underneath the covers, you should see that we really use a single instance home. And standard edition high availability says the single instance database must not be running on more than 2 sockets at any point in time. And that is exactly established here. Because if you set up standard edition high availability, then the database will either run on node 0 or on node 1, both of which have 2 sockets, but at no point in time will the standard edition database run on both of the servers at the same time. So thereby, you never exceed the maximum of 2 sockets running the standard edition database. I hope that makes sense. And as Phil and Paul explained, you can apply the 10-day failover rule. So for this one standard edition standard edition database that you want to put under standard edition high availability, if you ensure this database doesn't need the other node for more than 10 days, you're safe, as also the previous asker said. Be careful though. If you have 5 standard edition databases running on node 0, and any of them fail over for more than 10 days onto the other node, you inevitably need to license the other node for 2 sockets, because it is a standard edition per socket license for the system, not on a per database. So there is a subtle difference where you imply the maximums and also where you look at where's 10-day failover rule being configured. I hope that explains it. Otherwise, you can ask a follow-up question and perhaps we can discuss that one as well. Last thought on this one, please. Standard edition high availability is applicable, or 10-day failover rule applies to standard edition high availability. It also applies to Rack 1 node. Unfortunately, that hasn't been very clarified yet, or very well been clarified yet. So we are working on making this clearer, but our understanding is that Rack 1 node should also be subject to 10-day failover rule. That was another question regarding the difference between standard edition and Rack 1 node. I hope that clarified a few of the questions that I've heard. I apologize, I was driving while I had to speak. I'll give it back to you now, guys.
Okay, thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, Marcus, thanks a lot. I appreciate you drawing the comparison with Rack 1 node in particular, and drive safe.
Okay.
Any other people raising their hands or chat questions, Carlos?
There is another question from Trey. He's asking, on x86 hardware, will there be a licensing component to customers that want to use SCHA?
Well, they just set the license 19C database, and of course the normal licensing for Oracle Linux and Database Appliance as part of maintenance and so on.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't, for the regular x86 server, it's the same standard edition licensing rule. So they are, but again, you know, the failover is still subject to that 10-day failover rules that we talked about earlier. But the licensing is the same standard edition socket licensing.
So just for emphasis, someone asked, you know, essentially, does this apply to S&M machines? And when I said SCHA doesn't, it doesn't mean that 19.6 is not something that will run on S&M machines. 19.6 will run on S&M machines, just for a point of clarification. I think our development manager made that point to everyone in the chat, but I thought that's worth mentioning.
Go ahead, Skid.
All right, thanks. Yeah, sorry. So I'm just thinking now, if SE2 is being kind of rebranded as SE19C, does that imply that it's only for a 19C database? What if we are running other older versions of database on the same box?
Well, you could run older versions of the database. They just can't be rack databases. Everything that runs in 19C has to be single instance for SE, but you could run older versions of a database, but not part of 19C standard edition.
Okay, so just so I'm making sure I'm clear and I'm clear about your response. So if I'm running an HA system. I want to take advantage of SEHE. I think I just said that wrong. SEHA. And I have not only 19C databases I want to do that on, but what if I have a 12.2 or an 11.204 or something like that as well?
Well, those databases run as single instance databases, but they're not 19C. So it's only 19C databases that take advantage of the HA tooling.
Okay, so then on, you know, with 19.6, then when I try to create or move, you know, something less than a 19C database onto the system or create it, the SEHA implementation is not, it's going to be grayed out or something like that. Is that?
I thought you had existing non-19C databases.
Well, or perhaps existing, you know, yeah.
That feature won't be applicable to previous versions.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so no more questions, Paul. I think we can wrap up, and the team can always send emails, follow-up questions. Go ahead.
Okay, so well, thank you for attending this webcast, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much, and have a good weekend. We appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in May.